Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Tonight, we start with the Global South. Looks like everyone wants a piece of it. These countries have emerged as a powerful political entity in the 21st century. They can sway votes in the United Nations, they can bargain using their market size, and they're not scared of taking on the established powers. But the question is, who leads them? India has tried to take on that role to represent the Global South at international forums, but China doesn't want to be left behind. Xi Jinping is now wooing the Global South countries. We'll tell you why he's doing it. Also, what he's offering. In the Ukraine war, Europe is debating a controversial question. Should frozen Russian assets be used to arm Ukraine? If yes, what are the implications? In Pakistan, the parliament has convened after elections. And on cue, all hell broke loose. In West Asia, Israel is expanding its war. US officials fear that after Gaza, Lebanon could be next. Meanwhile, another AI startup is grabbing headlines in Europe. Can it challenge the might of OpenAI? In Chad, clashes have broken out, phone lines have been cut, and an opposition leader is dead. We'll tell you what triggered this violence. And finally, what's the deal with a leap day? Does February need an extra day every 4 years? We'll tell you what all sides are saying, but first, the headlines. Vladimir Putin warns of a real risk of a nuclear war if the West escalates the conflict in Ukraine. The Russian president says if any country dares to send troops to Kiev, they should be prepared for quote-unquote tragic consequences. Just days ago, French President Macron had refused to rule out sending troops to Ukraine. India's economy remains robust amid global turmoil. Its GDP grew by 8.4% from October to December 2023, beating expectations. The acceleration was fueled by good performance in the manufacturing, mining and construction sectors. Mauritius launches its India-funded airstrip and jetty in Agalega. Prime Minister Modi joins his Mauritian counterpart virtually to inaugurate the projects. Mauritius is an important partner of India's Neighbourhood First policy. Recently, India launched its Unified Payment Interface or UPI services in Mauritius. Japan's Prime Minister vows to end fundraising parties. The decision came as Prime Minister Fumio Kishida faced an ethics committee over a kickback scandal. He's the first sitting Prime Minister to attend such a hearing. Kishida has been in office since October 2021. The corruption scandal has seen his approval rating dip to a record low. And Saudi football's governing body suspends Cristiano Ronaldo for one game. The punishment is over a gesture the footballer made on the pitch last weekend. The Portuguese superstar has also been fined $8,000. The decision cannot be appealed. Xi Jinping has a lot of titles. The chairman of everything, the people's leader. There's even Xi Dada, which basically means Uncle Xi or Big Xi in Chinese. But he's not done with this. He's now chasing a new title for himself, the champion of the Global South. That's how India has been positioning itself, but now Xi Jinping wants the title and he's being quite brazen about it. Xi has a visitor, the leader of Sierra Leone. He's in Beijing. And Xi Jinping rarely meets any foreign dignitaries, but this time he's made an exception. The Chinese president met with this leader and gave an assurance.
China will work with African countries to strengthen mutual support and friendly cooperation, jointly tackle risks and challenges, further integrate the development of China, Africa, and the world.
China and Africa should work together. That's the message from Xi Jinping. How does he plan to do that, though? During this address, he spoke about the United Nations and how China can work in coordination with African nations like Sierra Leone at forums like the United Nations Security Council, where China happens to be a permanent member. So Xi Jinping is basically dangling a carrot. Stick with China and you'll be rewarded. That's the message from the Chinese president. And it is meant for the Global South countries. Xi Jinping's diplomats are also pushing this narrative. Consider some recent statements. China respects all countries as equals. Sure it does. China is naturally a member of the Global South. This is from a press conference in January. But why the sudden focus and pivot? How did the Global South become a priority for China? Because Xi Jinping sees it as his turf. And his messaging is not just about cooperation, it also includes criticism of Western institutions.
不搞意识形态对立。
Ideological confrontation, geopolitical rivalry, and bloc politics are not a choice for us. What we stand against are unilateral sanctions, economic coercion, and decoupling and supply chain disruption.
也反对脱钩断链。
It's a carefully crafted pitch, also carefully copied, a pleasurized pitch, if you will. India raised these issues much before China paid any attention to them. Last year, India organized 2 summits for the Global South. It highlighted the growing inequalities and the need to reform the multilateral system. At the G20, India pushed for the induction of the African Union, giving an important bloc representation and a seat at the global high table. So India is a clear champion for the Global South. Now China wants to gate crash because the messaging is effective. And while China's pitch may sound similar to India's, the execution is remarkably different, not to mention the end goals. India wants to reform existing institutions, improve the representation of the Global South countries at multilateral forums. China, on the other hand, seeks a completely new system, a system that Beijing can control. For every established institution in the West or Western-led institution, China is pitching an alternative system. For the United Nations, Beijing has the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. For the World Bank, it has the Belt and Road. To replace the World Trade Organization or WTO, China advocates the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. All these groups have many member countries. The SCO, the BRI, the RCEP, they have many members. But China has a special status within them, sort of like a super vote. There is concentration of power in the hands of one player, and while Western-led institutions are in urgent need of reform, they're hardly perfect. This Chinese alternative is not the answer to them. The Global South realizes this. A China-led world order will be fraught with risks. And that's the end goal of Xi Jinping's new campaign. His pitch for the Global South is basically his pitch for more power for himself and for China. And the world, both the Global North and the Global South, should be wary of it. Let's turn to Ukraine now. Their military campaign has largely stalled. They're losing cities, losing soldiers, and losing morale. One reason for that is money. The US was supposed to give $60 billion to Ukraine, but that aid is pending. It hasn't been approved by the US Congress. So the European Union is debating a new idea, and a rather controversial one. Listen to the EU chief.
It is time to start a conversation about using the windfall profits of frozen Russian assets to jointly purchase military equipment for Ukraine. There could be no stronger symbol and no greater use for that money than to make Ukraine and all of Europe a safer place to live.
Here's what that means. Most central banks and sovereign funds have assets abroad. They invest in foreign currencies or government bonds or simply bank deposits. And Russia was no different. Their central bank, the Russian central bank, had assets across the world, in the US, in Europe, in Canada, in Japan, even in Australia and Singapore. The biggest chunk was parked in Western nations. And how much money are we talking about? Around $324 billion, which is 16% of their GDP, $324 billion. When the war broke out, the West decided to freeze this Russian money. So Moscow could not access it anymore, $324 billion. And the message was quite simple. Stop the war and you will get your money back. It hasn't worked though. Even without this frozen money, Russia has the upper hand. So the new proposal is this. Take the profits from the frozen Russian assets and give them to Ukraine. It can be used to buy weapons and later in reconstruction. I know it sounds like an easy solution. Ukraine needs money. The West has frozen money. So why not give it to Kiev? The chorus is growing for such a move. You heard the EU president talk about it. And the US Treasury chief fully agrees with her. In fact, she says it's urgent.
I also believe it's necessary and urgent for our coalition to find a way to unlock the value of these immobilized assets to support Ukraine's continued resistance and long-term reconstruction, where we should act together and in a considered way. I believe there is a strong international law, economic, and moral case for moving forward.
Let me repeat that last part. The US says there is a legal and moral case to use the frozen Russian money. But is that true? Well, there is precedent. Let me take you back to 1992. Saddam Hussein's Iraq had invaded Kuwait. In response, the United Nations Security Council took a drastic step. It asked all UN members to freeze Iraqi assets. And this money was then used to compensate victims of the Iraqi invasion. In 2003, it happened again. The US froze all Iraqi assets in their country. That was some $1.7 billion. Iraqi money in America, it was frozen. So countries have done it before. But the circumstances were different. In 1992, it wasn't a unilateral decision. It was agreed by the United Nations Security Council, so the decision had legitimacy. In 2003, the US was at war with Iraq, so the assets belonged to an enemy country. But Russia's case is very different. A, the UNSC has not frozen Russian assets, and B, only Ukraine is at war with Russia. The US and Europe are not, which is why Brussels is delaying the decision. It's a complete grey area, legally, politically, and morally. Let's look at all these three aspects, in fact. If the West uses the frozen Russian money, Russia will challenge it legally. It could take years to settle those cases, not to mention it will spook investors. Imagine you're running a central bank or sovereign fund, maybe in West Asia or Africa. You see Brussels freeze and take away Russian assets. What's your reaction? Mostly fear. If it's Russia today, it could be you tomorrow. And that fear could keep investors away. It will shake confidence in Europe. The second problem is the politics. Not every European country wants to use Russian money. France, for example, they say that there is no legal basis for this.
We don't have a legal basis to seize the Russian assets. And we should never act if we don't obey by the international law and by the rule of law. Because what is at the core of the European countries, at the core of the European construction.
Plus, there could be blowback. If the West seizes Russian assets, Russia will respond in kind. It can seize the Russian businesses of Western firms. A tit-for-tat move. And finally, there is the moral question. This frozen money does not belong to Vladimir Putin. It's not his personal wealth. It belongs to the people of Russia. People who may or may not agree with Russia's war. Why are they being punished by the West? Why is their money being taken away? No answers. The West keeps talking about the rule of law, about a rules-based order, but the same West is eager to walk on this legal grey area. It's hypocrisy of the highest order. Just think about all the countries invaded and ravaged by the West. How much have they paid them? Absolutely nothing. So it's not about principles or justice. It's about vindictive and selective politics. Let's see if Europe goes ahead with it. Speaking of vindictive politics, Pakistan's parliament convened today. It was the first sitting of the newly elected lawmakers. What happened next was predictable. Protests, chaos and drama. It started with members of Imran Khan's party, that is the PTI. They entered the assembly hall with placards and posters. And they read, "Release Imran Khan." Then came Nawaz Sharif. He was returning to parliament after 7 years, but it was a comeback worth forgetting.
Order in the House, please.
The sloganeering was non-stop. PTI lawmakers chanted, "Vote Chor," meaning vote thief. Of course, the Sharif camp had to respond, so they shouted, "Ghadi Chor," meaning watch thief. Now, for those wondering, that's one of the cases against Imran Khan, that he siphoned off luxury watches. Now, Imran Khan himself is in jail, but his presence loomed over the parliament building, in fact, inside it too, because some PTI lawmakers turned up wearing Imran Khan masks, quite good ones too. All this chaos delayed the parliament session. It began almost 1 hour late. The first order of business was the swearing-in. Around 302 lawmakers took the oath, including Nawaz Sharif, his brother Shehbaz, and Asif Ali Zardari, also Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. So all the key players have taken oath. What happens next? More elections. These lawmakers will elect Pakistan's new office bearers, the Speaker, the Deputy Speaker, and of course the Prime Minister. That vote is expected over the weekend. All bets are on Shehbaz Sharif. He is the joint candidate of the Sharifs and the Bhuttos. But don't write the PTI off. We did that during the general election. We saw how that played out. Imran Khan's party, the PTI, has put forward its own prime ministerial candidate. His name is Omar Ayub. Omar is the General Secretary of PTI. He's also the grandson of former President Ayub Khan. So that's where things stand. But getting here was not easy. In Pakistan, the president has to call the parliament to session. But President Arif Alvi refused to do that. He's a close aide of Imran Khan. So President Alvi said he won't call the parliament session. Now, this presented a constitutional crisis because there's a deadline to convene the first session of parliament. It must be convened within 21 days of the election. In this case, before February 29, that is today. So guess what the caretaker government did? They got the parliament secretariat to call the session. It was only this morning that President Alvi relented. It sums up Pakistan's problem. Their political process has been completely stalled. Forget policies. No one can agree on who won the election. How will Pakistan navigate its financial crisis like this? Islamabad is counting on outside support, outside help, and China is giving them a post-election gift, it seems. Pakistan was due to repay a $2 billion loan next month, in the month of March, but Beijing has rolled it over. Basically, they don't have to repay now, they can repay next year. And it's not just China. The United States is also backing Pakistan's new government. They want Islamabad to approach the IMF again.
Pakistan's new government must immediately prioritize the economic situation because the policies over the next several months will be crucial to maintaining economic stability for Pakistanis. And we urge Pakistan to continue working with the IMF and other international financial institutions towards macroeconomic reforms.
That seems to be the plan. Nawaz Sharif says fixing the economy will be the top priority. There is also talk of another IMF bailout. Imran Khan is opposing it, though. He has written a letter to the IMF chief. And what does it say? It says that Pakistan's election results should be audited. Only then should the loan be given. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has not reacted to the letter yet. But since the US does not mind, neither will the fund. That's how it works, it seems. Which brings us to Pakistan's economy. Will another IMF loan be enough for Pakistan? Not unless structural changes are made. Pakistan's mess is the result of mismanagement and corruption over many years. A prime example of that is the PIA, the Pakistan International Airlines. It used to be the flag carrier of the country, but this year it was put up for sale. Why? Because the losses kept mounting. In 2022, the PIA lost almost $300 million. Total losses since 2012, $7 billion. It's basically a sinking ship. So the crew is jumping overboard, like Mariam Raza. She was a crew member on board a PIA flight to Canada. She went from Pakistan to Canada, and once they landed there, she disappeared. She did not board the flight back home. Instead, she left a note. It said, "Thank you, PIA." And this is not a one-off case. Mariam is not alone. A number of Pakistani flight attendants have disappeared in Canada. Most of them land there, stay back, and seek asylum. Pakistan blames it on Canada's relaxed rules, but clearly that's not the only problem. Wages are low, the company's future is uncertain, and the country is stumbling from one loan to the next. Only a stable and reformist government can help Pakistan, and this is not that government. So that's one Indian neighbor in trouble, but the list doesn't end there. Another one, Myanmar, faces a different challenge, that of a civil war. Myanmar's ruling junta is fighting ethnic rebel groups, and they're not doing well. The junta keeps losing soldiers and land, so India is worried. It shares a pretty long border with Myanmar, some 1,600 kilometers of it, the India-Myanmar border, 1,600 kilometers. So New Delhi is worried of a spillover, which is why it has taken a controversial decision. India has decided to fence its border with Myanmar.
म्यांमार के साथ हमारी सीमा जो खुली सीमा है, नरेंद्र मोदी सरकार ने निर्णय करा है कि भारत म्यांमार सीमा को हम बाढ़ से सुरक्षित करेंगे और पूरी सीमा पर बांग्लादेश की तर्ज पर बाढ़ लगाने का काम करेंगे। और म्यांमार के साथ हमारा फ्री आवाजाही का जो एग्रीमेंट है, ये एग्रीमेंट पर भी भारत सरकार पुनः विचार कर रही है।
Just one problem though. Some Indian states are not on board. The Mizoram Assembly has passed a resolution against it. They want the centre to reconsider. They do not want a border fence. Nagaland is also against the proposal. They haven't passed a resolution yet, but the Deputy Chief Minister said it would be unacceptable. I guess the question is why. Here's what Mizoram's Home Minister says, and I'm quoting, "The British geographically divided the Zo ethnic people who have inhabited Mizoram and the Chin Hills of Myanmar for centuries together. We have been dreaming of reunification and cannot accept the India-Myanmar border imposed upon us." So that's the issue. Border communities in India have families on the other side. They like being able to visit each other, and this is guaranteed under the current system. The system is called the FMR, the Free Movement Regime, FMR. And what does it say? Suppose you live near the India-Myanmar border. You can travel up to 16 kilometers inside the other country. From India to Myanmar and from Myanmar to India, 16 kilometers on either side. You can stay there for a limited time, and that too without a visa. Mizoram and Nagaland want to keep it that way. Two other northeastern states do not want it. That's Manipur and Arunachal Pradesh. They want the border to be fenced. Again, let's look at why. Problem number one is the civil war. It has forced thousands of Myanmar nationals to flee. Since 2021, around 31,000 people from Myanmar have arrived in India. Out of this, 5,000 arrived after the recent clashes in the last few months. Manipur is especially not happy with this. The state of Manipur has been gripped by ethnic violence since last year. Its chief minister says the free movement regime has not helped them. So he's got two demands. One, fence the border, and two, cancel or modify the free movement regime. And you can understand why. The situation in Manipur is already sensitive. The last thing you want is outside influence, like Myanmar groups using the free movement regime to enter Manipur, or rebel weapons being sneaked into the state. Now, problem number two, drug smuggling. Myanmar is the largest opium poppy producer. It's a hub for drugs like heroin and meth. A lot of it is now coming to India. Last week, a major drug ring was busted in Mizoram. Drugs worth 3 crore rupees were seized. 6 peddlers were also held. Among them, 4 were from Myanmar. In fact, Mizoram seems to be the new focus because smugglers used to take the Manipur route. But the violence has forced them to look for alternatives, and they've settled on Mizoram. And data supports this. In 2023, Mizoram arrested 385 people for smuggling drugs. 55 of them were from Myanmar. So clearly there is a problem, and chances are it will get worse, because the civil war is not de-escalating. Yes, the junta has suffered some losses, but they're not giving up. In the east, they have put 2 cities under martial law. All powers have been granted to soldiers. The idea is to stamp out any dissent, to nip any rebellion in the bud. So India is right to prepare for the chaos in Myanmar. The only question is, how do they do it? Because a porous border is risky during times of conflict. If the civil war escalates, things may spiral out of control. At the same time, ethnic ties are important. They're a key aspect of relations between India and Myanmar. They're also necessary for internal peace. It's definitely a tough balance. So striking it requires engagement and cooperation. Now let's look at the war in West Asia. Israel continues to pummel Gaza. Ceasefire talks are on. The world is desperately trying to bring about a truce before Israel enters Rafah, the last remaining refuge for Palestinians in Gaza. US President Joe Biden hopes to announce a ceasefire by Monday. That's very optimistic. But his optimism is not shared by others in the White House. In fact, some think that even if a truce is announced, the fighting will continue. It may not continue in Gaza. They're afraid that Israel may open a new front against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The US fears that Israel may even launch a ground operation, starting another full-scale war. Here's our report.
If there is anyone here who thinks that when we will reach a deal to release hostages in the South Gaza and the fire stops, this will make things easier than what is happening here, they are wrong. We will continue the fire and we will increase it regardless of what is happening in the South until we achieve our goals. The goal is simple, to withdraw Hezbollah to where it should be, either by agreement or we will do it by force.
That was Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant. He sent out this message on Monday while inspecting Israel's defenses in Safed. Safed is a city in the country's north, about half an hour away from the Israel-Lebanon border. This region has been a hotspot. Since October 7th, Israel has been trading fire with Hezbollah. Both sides have engaged in cross-border shelling almost daily. But Israel hasn't stopped at just that. It regularly conducts airstrikes in Lebanon. This shot was taken yesterday. It shows an Israeli jet near the border. The Israeli army said it took down a Hezbollah weapons storage facility. But on Monday, the day Gallant released his message, there was an escalation. Israel had attacked Hezbollah in Baalbek, a city far away from the Israel-Lebanon border. It was the farthest north that Israel had struck, and they did it to take out Lebanese surface-to-air missile defense systems. These missiles had brought down an Israeli drone, so they had to go. The attacks so far north and the defense minister's statements have sent alarm bells ringing. Israel's top ally, the US, is now worried. They believe Israel may be preparing to launch an incursion into Lebanon. Reports say that Biden administration officials are getting intelligence briefings about this. The incursion could take place in a few weeks. This could occur irrespective of what happens with Hamas and Gaza, because Israel has a different objective when it comes to Hezbollah. They want the group to back away from the border and establish a Hezbollah-free buffer zone to ensure the safety of citizens in northern Israel. You see, Hezbollah is way more dangerous than Hamas. They have a mix of long and short-range rockets. They have advanced weaponry that can cause serious damage. Now, Israel knows it cannot eliminate Hezbollah completely, so it wants to push the group away from the border. Israel says they want to do this diplomatically, and the US is in talks with Lebanon to try and arrange this. But if the talks fail, Israel says it'll push Hezbollah back by force. American officials are now worried, because this course of action will be disastrous. A war in the north would be far more deadly for Israel. To even consider this escalation is asking for trouble, and it risks the war expanding across the region. So then why is Israel threatening to do this? They say it's to ensure the safety of citizens in northern Israel. About 80,000 have been displaced by the uptick in cross-border firing. Israel says it wants to send them back home and keep them safe from Hezbollah. But is there a political motive too? Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under pressure. Some blame him for failing to prevent the Hamas attack in October. While the war is on, his premiership is secure. But what happens when the fighting stops? Won't the Israelis want to hold him accountable? Reports say that this is what Netanyahu wants to avoid. If the war doesn't end, he doesn't get hauled up. It's cynical to the extreme, and we have no proof that this is what Netanyahu is planning. But Israel's recent actions have done nothing to dispel these dangerous rumors doing the rounds.
The year was 2022. Artificial intelligence was just taking off. OpenAI announced ChatGPT. The world discovered the power of AI. Big tech was loving it. They poured billions of dollars into it. But sitting in a Google office, a man called Arthur Mensch had different thoughts. He was a 30-year-old. He saw the hype and he thought to himself, why just the US? Why can't Europe have something like OpenAI? Soon after this, he quit his job. A year later, Mistral AI was born. It's a French tech startup. Mistral means a strong wind blowing from France, and right now it's taking the world of AI by storm. The company is based in Paris. It's barely 9 months old. It has around 22 employees and 3 founders, Arthur Mensch, Timothy Lacroix, and Guillaume Lomple. They're all in their early 30s. They all studied in France. They all worked in big tech. They all want to make AI efficient. Right now, Mistral is valued at slightly over $2 billion. Silicon Valley heavyweights are backing it. Take Microsoft, for example. It's investing some $16 million in Mistral. The same Microsoft that backs OpenAI, they're putting $16 million into this company. Looks like Satya Nadella wants to keep his eggs in all AI baskets. The question is why? It's because of a new LLM. That's large language model, LLM. Remember that. It'll keep cropping up in the weeks and months ahead, this term. Basically, LLM is an algorithm. Algorithms like these power generative AI and give models like ChatGPT the ability to answer questions like humans. OpenAI made GPT-4. It's called the world's most powerful LLM. But on February 26th, Mistral announced something called Mistral Large, a new LLM, a new large language model. And it rivals GPT-4. The performance is comparable, but the cost is far less. Mistral's model costs less than $22 million. GPT-4, on the other hand, costs close to $100 million. 22 million versus 100 million. It's a massive price difference. And it's because of Mistral's vision. They say they want to make AI more capital efficient. And Silicon Valley is taking note. We already told you about Microsoft. They've signed a deal with a company. So has Amazon. And IBM is using a version of its model. Its funders include NVIDIA and Salesforce. Plus, Mistral enjoys strong political support at home. French President Macron has called this company French genius. He has shared the stage with the founders. Paris has lobbied for the startup at the EU. It's almost like a fairy tale now, a small startup taking on the big wigs with the kind of support they're getting. But how far can they go? Can this company compete with OpenAI? Let's look at the numbers. OpenAI is already the industry leader. It has 770 employees. ChatGPT is a known brand, a known name. It is valued at $80 billion, 80. Now look at the investments. Microsoft has put $16 million in Mistral. But it has put $13 billion in OpenAI. That's 800 times higher. So it's still a David versus Goliath battle. But Mistral has a few things going for it. First of all, it's not part of Silicon Valley, and that helps with investments because companies want to target different markets. They want to assure regulators. So being across the Atlantic is an advantage. 2, some of Mistral's models are open. Unlike OpenAI that has closed models, basically most of their LLMs are free to download. And 3, Mistral talks about efficiency. It wants to save capital. Like most tech startups, it doesn't want to blow money, and that always appeals to investors. That said, Mistral has a tough battle ahead. If it wants to take on OpenAI, it has to do more than just being efficient. It's a story we'll track. Our next story is for anyone who is on the road frequently and often forgets to charge their phone. Imagine you're at the airport. You're waiting for your flight. Your phone is running out of battery. You look for a public charger and plug in. It can be a lifesaver. In many cases, you don't even need a charger of your own. These charging ports come with cables. You don't need a cable of your own. So you can easily juice up your phone. But do you know about the risk involved here? India's central bank is worried. That's the Reserve Bank of India. It fears that these public chargers could be exploited by hackers. They could gain access into your phone. So should you avoid a public charger altogether? Our next report has the answer.
How many times has this happened to you? You wake up, you're late for work, your best bet to reach on time is to make a dash for the door. When you hit the traffic, realization strikes. Your phone is running out of battery. You open your bag to hunt for the charger. Strike number 2. You left the cable and the adapter at home. But there is a savior waiting at work. It's a charging station, usually wrapped in colourful advertising and equipped with ports and plugs of all shapes and sizes. The service is complimentary. All that is needed is a bit of patience. Wait long enough and you shall be rewarded with a fully charged device, enough to see you through the day. But as a wise geek once said, when something's free, you are the product. But really, how risky can charging a phone be? Turns out, plugging your phone in public may not be as safe as it's supposed to be. India's Reserve Bank wants every user to be on alert. They think if a public charger is compromised, hackers could easily hijack your phone, gain access to crucial information, and cause significant damage. The threat is called juice jacking. It's not a new concern. Back in 2011, 2 men decided to put a spotlight on the risks. Brian Marcus and Robert Rowley. To make their point, they chose a cybersecurity conference, the DEF CON. Marcus and Rowley built a charging kiosk. They installed it at the venue. The rules were the same. If you needed a charge, just approach the kiosk and plug in. Over 360 individuals had dying devices. They approached the kiosk to charge. But when they plugged in, they were greeted with a warning. Don't trust random charging stations. Since then, even the FBI has asked users to be cautious. In 2023, they gave this advice: avoid using free charging stations at airports, hotels, shopping centers, or anywhere else. Plugging an unknown cable can infect your device. Hackers may be able to install malware which can easily be used to steal your data or worse, snoop on you. So what are the alternatives? The best bet is to carry your own charger. Not just the cable but the adapter too. Using an electrical outlet is much safer than plugging an unknown cable. If you run out of battery frequently, just invest in a power bank. Public charging is convenient. And for a world where being connected is a necessity, it's perhaps indispensable. But if the system is compromised, it's far better to deal with a phone that's out of charge rather than giving a hacker the chance to steal your data.
Our next story comes from Chad. It's a country in Central Africa, another former French colony, another country run by a military junta. Well, that was supposed to change soon. But now there are disturbing reports coming out of Chad. There was an attack in the capital, N'Djamena. It took place yesterday. The army was called in, and now an opposition leader is dead. Chad's internet has been cut. News is trickling out slowly, but here's what we know so far. The dead opposition leader is Yaya Dillo Djeru. He was the leader of the Socialist Party Without Borders. It's an opposition party. It's a party aligned against the current junta leader. His name is Mohamed Deby. Now, Dillo and Deby were cousins and rivals. Dillo was poised to compete against Deby in Chad's upcoming presidential election. But now he's dead. It sends a chilling message. Here's the chain of events that led to his killing. On Tuesday, Chad's election agency made an announcement, the dates for the upcoming presidential election. They will take place over May and June. The results are scheduled to be announced on July 7th. Now, this was supposed to be a victory for democracy in Chad. But what has followed has soured the sentiment. On Tuesday itself, 2 members of the opposition party were rounded up, apparently for attacking Chad's Supreme Court chief. The junta says they went to arrest the attackers, but they're ending up killing people. Like Abakar Torabi. He belonged to the opposition party. He was killed during his arrest. His body was reportedly taken to Chad security headquarters. Opposition leaders say they went to retrieve the body, and they went with Torabi's family. But the junta has a different story. They say that the security headquarters was attacked, apparently an overnight assault by the opposition party, and the junta claim that they shot the attackers in self-defense. The opposition, of course, denies this. Either way, several people were dead by Wednesday morning, and Chad's military forces had taken over the capital. The next step was retaliation. The troops apparently surrounded the opposition party offices. and the party leader Yaya Dillo Dejeru was inside. He put out this Facebook post. He said that the party was under siege. That's the last we heard from him. Today an announcement came that Dillo had been killed. That's one less rival for junta leader Mohammad Debi. Now this story may have you feeling uneasy, but it's hardly the worst of it. The situation in Chad has seemed off for years. Debi is a second-generation coup leader. His father, Idris Debi, successfully led a coup in 1990. 1990, he went on to rule till 2021, winning one dubious election after the other and staying in power for 31 years. The senior Debi died in 2021. He was shot while commanding Chad's armed forces against rebels. He succumbed to his gunshot injuries. That's when his scion took over, Mohammad Debi. There was a coup. The National Assembly was dissolved. Debi Jr. was proclaimed the transitional president of Chad. 2021, transitional president, and he has ruled ever since. He's made a few U-turns during this tenure. He keeps delaying the transition to civilian rule. First, it was supposed to be 18 months, then another 2 years, and now who knows, perhaps longer. His term was due to conclude by October 10th this year. He also said he won't stand for the presidency. But then he pushed a new constitution in December. It said Debi Jr. can now become president. That's what the new constitution says. He's not officially declared his candidacy yet. He had rivals like Dillo, but now that rival is dead. All of this reeks of authoritarianism and tyranny, things that the West is supposed to be standing against. So why don't we hear the United Nations or the European Union condemning Chad? Is it because Debi is close to the French? Unlike the other juntas in the region, Chad is firmly in the Western fold. Debi Sr. had partnered with the French, and Debi Jr. has also remained close to the old colonizers. So far, this seems to have given him a free pass. But will the West ignore these latest reports as well? If their usual hypocrisy is anything to go by, we likely won't hear a peep out of the hallowed halls of Western democracy. India's financial capital has a unique problem. It's related to a bridge. It's called the Gokhale flyover. It was demolished in 2022. It was being reconstructed. Once done, it would be linked to another flyover, but there's a slight hiccup, a tiny miscalculation. The two bridges do not link. Do you know why? Because there's a vertical gap of almost 6 feet between them. How did that happen? Can Mumbai bridge this gap? Are there more such architectural goof-ups in the world? Our next report tells you.
In 2018, tragedy struck Mumbai's Gokhale flyover. A portion of it collapsed. 2 people were killed. It was in a dangerous condition. So, in 2022, it was demolished. The idea was to reconstruct it. The bridge was also linked to the Barfiwala flyover. So the idea was to build the Gokhale bridge again. And once done, it would have connected with the Barfiwala flyover. Sounds simple enough. No architectural marvel there. Just 2 bridges that needed to be connected. But the reality was quite different. Gokhale flyover was built. It was, in fact, reopened this week. But a problem soon emerged. It wasn't connected to the Barfiwala flyover. There is a 6-foot vertical gap between the 2 bridges. So, unless you are proficient in the long jump, you won't be able to make it from one bridge to another. It's left engineers and citizens with their heads scratching. The government says it's because of a railway policy. The flyover was being built over railway tracks, so it had to be built higher. But that doesn't solve the problem. How does one bridge this gap? A solution is yet to be found. Civic bodies are trading blame, and residents remain inconvenienced. At the heart, it's an architectural mistake. But it's far from being an isolated case. There have been many such mistakes in the world. Take the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington. It opened in 1940. It was once the world's 3rd longest suspension bridge, but there was one big problem. The 200-meter-long bridge oscillated when it was too windy. It closed 4 months later after a big collapse. Then there's this high-rise apartment building in Spain. It has 47 floors. At one point, it was the highest apartment building in Europe. But if you wanted to reach the top floor, you had to get ready for the hike. Because until some time ago, the apartment did not have an elevator above 27 floors. So there was no way to get to the top floors without walking. And of course, there's the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's among the wonders of the world. But the tower wasn't built to lean. The area it is built on is made of clay, but the cathedral's architects did not seem to care. They made the tower with foundations only 3 meters deep on marshy land. So, with the uneven foundation and the soft soil, the tower started to lean. To compensate, engineers tried to tilt it in the opposite direction, but nothing worked. The tower is still leaning, and it is still standing even after 7 centuries. Looks like architectural goof-ups are not a phenomenon of this century. India's financial capital may be struggling with its new bridge, but if it takes a cue from history, it will know that it is not always easy to bridge the gap between the blueprint and reality.
Our last story tonight is about, well, today, February 29th. Today is a leap day. It is not a holiday, and it goes unmentioned on many calendars. The only way many remember it is through a Google Doodle, perhaps. But Leap Day is special in its own way. In fact, February 29th is actually the most important date on the calendar. It is the one date that keeps all other dates in check. To understand why, let's go back to basics. You know that the Earth orbits the Sun, but it takes the Earth a weird amount of time to do this. Not 365 days, not 366 days, but this number of days. 365 days, 6 hours and 9 minutes. So the Earth takes just over 365 days to take a trip around the Sun, and this is highly inconvenient. If we were to follow this, we would celebrate New Year at midnight one year, then 6 a.m. the next. Party planning would be a bigger hassle than it already is, and everything would fall out of sync. But what if we just stuck to 365 days? It's not like the time police will hound anyone. Well, in that case, the calendar would fall out of sync with seasons. After 100 years, the calendar would be off by 25 days. After 750 years, those living in the Northern Hemisphere would be celebrating Christmas in summer and Valentine's Day in the autumn. So love would be in the air and dead leaves would be on the ground. That's hardly romantic. So Earthlings came up with a solution. They decided to add an extra day every 4 years on February 29th, which is today. It's a mathematical marvel. Yet some people want to wipe it off the calendar like time measurement mavens. The scientists who think leap day is bogus. They have proposed alternative calendars. One of them eliminates leap day and adds a full week at the end of December every 6 years. According to that calendar, today is February 30th, 30. Sounds wrong just saying it. But there are some others who aren't fans of leap days, like those born on leap days. To all the leaplings watching Vantage, here's a fun fact for you. Your chances of being born on February 29th were slim, about 1 out of 1,461. But despite the tiny odds, here you are. We get that some leapers don't take pride in this special status. Maybe it's the absurd nicknames, like leaplings or leapers. That's my bad. Maybe it's the tired questions like, do you get presents once every 4 years? Or maybe it's the country leapers are born into. Scottish culture, for example, believes that leaplings are unlucky. So did the Soviet Union. After all, communist dictators aren't known to love individuality. The Greek and Germans think leap years are unlucky as well. But they aren't the only ones. Many parents still dodge leap days. There are reports of parents rescheduling C-sections and doctors willingly changing birth dates on certificates. But that rarely applies to Indians. In India, those born on February 29th are often considered special. They're believed to possess unique talents. But no one loves leap day like the Irish. According to legend, St. Patrick was once asked if women could propose to men. Now, St. Patrick did not love the idea, but he agreed on one condition: women could propose only on leap days. What can I say? People pleasers and their creative solutions. So even today, Irish women propose marriage to men on leap day. It's called the ladies' privilege. Whether it is a privilege is debatable, but the tradition is huge in Ireland. It was later adopted in Denmark and Finland as well. Meanwhile, America has its own leap day traditions. It is to party 4 times harder. In New Mexico, leaplings gather to celebrate birthdays together. In Texas, a 4-day festival is held in honor of them. And across the world, leapers can take advantage of free food specials, and the rest of us can enjoy leap day sales. But tradition or not, there are many reasons to love leap day. It brings the possibility of extra time, of trying something new, the chance to be an exciting person, even if it is once every 4 years. As for leaplings, Leap Day gives you the opportunity to stay forever young, because you could be 64 years old and still be celebrating your sweet 16. Now, who wouldn't want to leap for Leap Day? And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Texas, first responders drive through roads surrounded by wildfires. In Dubai, 8 pilots compete in the world's first ever jet suit race. And in Belgium, a World War II era bomb was detonated on a beach. Also taking you back in history, on this day in 1996, the siege of Sarajevo came to an end. For 1,425 days, about 350,000 people were stuck in the Bosnian capital, cut off from the outside world. They were subjected to daily shellings and sniper attacks. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.